On now? Yes, I'm on now. Thank you. We're going to just start this session with another one of our lovely cinema stories. You will have just heard from Wendy from Hyde Park, and this is Hyde Park Picture House's cinema story. Thank you.
Yeah, because it is kind of like a bit of a ruin at the minute. It's a bit of a shell. It doesn't feel like the kind of cosy picture house that everybody's familiar with. But it is, what's the expression? You have to break a few eggs to make an omelette. You kind of have to rip a few holes in the walls to make to make it good again. So yeah, I know what you mean. It's kind of this in between limbo of the project before it's actually physically different.
The cinema as it's been for the last 10 or 20 years is very much like a thin snapshot of this kind of constantly changing space. And I think understanding how just the colour palette of like the wall scrapings, have you seen the weird little ice cream sandwich photos? Like the idea that cinema maybe used to be like baby blue and like, hot pink at the same time or something. There's this, I think there's a lot of people who are regulars have a really firm idea of what the picture house is for them. And I think it'd be nice to be able to show them how much it's changed and how much it will have to change in the future.
I don't think that there's an impossible wish about what it could be, because the cinema is what the cinema is to so many different people, and those different people have a dream and a wish that are going to be similar or different or maybe a crossover. So that's kind of what is so wonderful about the cinema.
With the extra space, there's a pressure of expansion and opening up to new potentials that we couldn't really facilitate before, that being program based potentially, and catering for a lot of different interests and needs. And I think there's a lot of pressure to kind of get that right straight away, and those things take time to really develop. I think you shouldn't come with all the answers, and that it's a learning space with the communities that you work with and who come and who you want to come. So I think it's that kind of uneasy balance of direction but also listening and response.
It's like taking a mould of some precious object and then turning that mould inside out to investigate its inner shape and structure. It's actually a rare opportunity to step outside of our comfortable, privileged positions within the relative safety of our independent heritage building. To see those barriers to access, both physical and cultural, and question them and vitally do something about it.
But I do think also there's just something about it will be opening with perhaps a slightly changed group of people, which is inevitable because we've had the pandemic. It's been closed for a long time and people have moved on. And there was something very nurturing about the community in that cinema, between the staff, the volunteers, all the people who were actually there, facilitating the events.
Yeah, it's difficult to know how you build that up again when you start from scratch, and how you make something that is more stable and more professional, but then when it feels like there was some magic there historically, like how do you manufacture magic and love for each other? Like there was a lot of love over the years where when people had hard times they carried each other through, and you can never force that. It was just something people chose to do. And my ideas about what was magic and what was special in the past will have been different to other people's experiences, and there will come a point where I have to let what is be, and I can't control it as much as I would like to try. Thank you, Hyde Park. And if anybody really likes pin badges, I recommend checking out their fundraiser because they're beautiful. Okay, I'm delighted to introduce Jack Powell from the BFI for our next session, utilising national and regional agendas. Thanks, Jack.
Hey everyone, nice to see everybody, both in person and nice to have people in the ether over the internet as well. My name's Jack and I work in the Corporate and Industry Affairs team at the BFI, and I'm going to be chairing this session on the government's levelling up agenda and what that can mean for cultural, creative businesses and organisations. I'm joined by two guests over over the screen, we've got Shahina and Chris with us, both of whom have experience of the kind of various funds and programmes that government has run on Levelling Up Agenda so far. So I might just pass to both of you to talk a bit about who you are and what you do. Start with you, Shahina.
Thanks, and morning everyone, really good to be here. So I'm Shahina Johnson and I'm Chief Exec and Artistic Director of Create Studios, which is a participatory social enterprise based in Swindon. We work across the region and also nationally with partners. And we are about to celebrate our 40th anniversary in a couple of years' time. So really significant time for us, having been around a while, and in a minute I'm going to be talking about our journey of how we're looking at a new venue. Hopefully we'll be in by our 40th anniversary.
Nice one, thanks Shahina, and I'll pass to Chris.
Good afternoon everyone. My name's Chris Batstone. I'm a Senior Relationship Manager for Arts Council England, and I'm based in the north of England, although I'm speaking to you today from a snowy, very cold Newcastle. But it's lovely to be with you, even if I can't be there in person. I'd just say it's also very weird being on screen and watching yourself on screen. So I might look a bit startled at times. My role is broadly about strategic partnerships, which means Arts Council's external stakeholder relationships, particularly with local authorities, the other arm's length funding bodies, and levelling up agendas are very much a core part of my work, and I'm still finding out what it all means for myself.
Nice one. Well, good to have both of you with us and to have kind of two different perspectives on what's gone on so far and what's going to happen over the coming years. So in terms of what we wanted to cover today, I think the way that we're going to run it is I'm going to give a bit of an overview of like what actually is the Levelling Up Agenda and what does it mean in practice, like what funding have we seen coming through so far. So I'll give you the kind of the background and the context, as it were, and then we'll open up to discussion, and I think we'll talk with Shahina and Chris about how cultural organisations can tap into what I've set out, what it looks like in reality, and what kind of tips and tricks the both of them have for organisations that might have ambitions to tap into some of that funding. And then, we'll have loads of time for questions from people as well at the end. So do keep visiting Menti and putting in all your questions there. With that said, I am going to ask, I think we're going to say goodbye to Shahina and Chris for like 2 minutes while we bring up one slide that I have prepped, which is just setting out some of the like funding strands we've seen so far. So, as I say, what is the Levelling Up Agenda? I think it's a term that people hear a lot from UK government in particular, but there is often kind of a lot of confusion about what it actually means. What government have said, both in the 2019 manifesto that they fought the election on, and also through a speech that Boris Johnson gave in July this year, was that the whole thing is about redressing social and economic imbalances that we see between different nations and regions of the UK. So the UK is, as you know, like a really heavily concentrated developed economy. A lot of like jobs and growth are so heavily centred in London and the southeast in particular, and it's not just that economic performance, it's also the kind of cultural opportunities that come with that. If you look at even the kind of the number of cinemas per capita, the heavy concentration in that single part of the country does mean that the offer of living here is imbalanced between different parts of the UK. And government have said that their Levelling Up Agenda is about putting investment into different parts of the UK, outside of London and the southeast, to try and redress that, to try and bring economic opportunities, but also cultural experiences, social experiences that bring quality of life a little bit more equitable across different parts of the UK. I mean, that's the principle, but what does it mean in terms of, like, what does it mean in terms of money? Like, what is actually being put out there? we've had a couple of funding commitments. In terms of what the government reckons happens on a big picture strategic front on levelling up, we are due a white paper from government setting out their kind of strategy over the next the next couple of years on investment across the UK. That's we think is coming December, but it's not. I mean, it's not totally confirmed, so it may come a little bit later than that. The idea is that will set out their kind of plan of action. That being said, we do know a number of strands of funding that they have run or are running to kind of back up this levelling up agenda pledge, which I'm going to talk through really quickly now. The first thing that we saw, which isn't on this list because it's actually closed now, is the Towns Fund, which was a £3.6 billion investment, which was open to a list of 101 towns across the regions of England specifically. And the idea there was that it could towns or cities, combined authorities could bid in for a bit of that money to change their city's offer. The big three focuses were on transport, planning, and urban regeneration, including explicitly cultural offers. So basically, combined authorities, local authorities could put together a plan of all the different things that they wanted to do and submit that to government, and they would look at whether they wanted to fund it. All that money has been committed now to all 101 towns. That's signed, sealed, not quite delivered. The towns have till 2025 to put those plans into action. And I know Shahina in a minute is going to talk to us about some of the work that they're doing in Swindon around culture through the Towns Fund. So that was kind of that was the first pass of government spending in this area. And it kind of set a bit of a template for a number of things that are open now, which are on the screen. So the two big ones that I wanted to talk about first, which again are run through bids made by the unitary authority in your area, are the Levelling Up Fund. That's open. Well, that's running now, and that is a UK-wide fund around very similar aims to the Towns Fund. So again, you're looking at urban regeneration, planning, creating opportunities for jobs and employment. That is available to local authorities working in any part of the UK. There's not a preset list. If you come up with a plan that that government kind of accepts and finds to be in line with the kind of the strategic requirements, business requirements, whatever that they are marking against, then it can go to you. There has been one round of this so far, so I think about 1.7 billion of it has been committed, but there are going to be a number of other rounds of this over the next couple of years. The idea is that MPs in Westminster will pick kind of one bid as it comes in from their area to back and to decide that's kind of the project that they want to run with, and then it will be to go to the Department for Levelling Up to look at. So we don't know exactly when the next round of that will be because we are waiting on the Levelling Up white paper, which might make some changes to how it runs. We shall see more and on. But yeah, that's the big one. That's the big one for kind of like capital projects. The other one I wanted to flag was the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, which again is forthcoming, and the idea there is that it will back projects that are around skills and employment. Again, kind of working through this unitary authority model. We don't know how much money is going to be in it yet. All we know is that in the 2019 manifesto, government said they would be equal to the kind of investment we were seeing through European structural funds in these areas. Yeah, we don't know how much it will be or when exactly it will run at the moment. They have done they did a pilot with something called the Community Renewal Fund, which had like 220 mil available over the last year for this kind of project. But again, just in terms of thinking how cultural and creative organisations work within like a wider plan for the area, that's something to think about on the horizon. And then there's one more thing that I wanted to flag, which it's a levelling up fund. It doesn't come through unitary authorities, but I thought this was a really good opportunity just to flag, in case people don't know about it, which is Community Ownership Fund. So this is something government announced, which is a £150 million fund that is there to protect community assets that are at risk of loss. So that might be a pub, it might be a cinema, it might be a theatre. If you can show that that's at risk of going away, and you can show a plan for keeping that within kind of community ownership through a community interest company or through a not-for-profit, then they will put money in. So I think there's going to be 8 rounds of that, and they've had like 1 so far. The next one is open this month. There's one going to be open in May. So again, this isn't going to be something we focus on too much in this discussion, but I wanted to flag it because I think it's a really can be quite an interesting thing. And if anybody wants more info on it, just come to me or send me an email, and we can talk about it more. Okay, that's kind of it at the moment in terms of what we know on funding strands that are available. So the big ones at the moment, as I say, Levelling Up Fund and the UK SPF coming down the road. And obviously, the combined authorities and local authorities working across the country set their own agenda on things like skills development, planning, and economic development. So these kind of organisations are really, really critical contacts when you're thinking about what projects you might have that can really support that, the kind of work they do in those areas. That's been a whistle stop on what is available. I think what's most useful is probably just to hear from organisations that have successfully kind of got some of this funding so far, about how they managed to do it, and what other organisations can potentially learn from that process. So I might ask for the slide to be taken away now, and we'll go back to Shahina and Chris. And I think we'll just talk like one at a time, really, about your experience of these things and any tips you have. So Shahina, we might turn to you first and ask if you can just tell us, a bit more about the kind of work Create Studios has been doing already, and what the Towns Fund is kind of investing in you to do.
Okay, thank you. So Create Studios, as I said before, we've been around for nearly 40 years. We grew out of the sort of community media movement of the 80s, and obviously really proud that we are still here to tell that tale. And we've done the journey of going from analog to digital and looking at outreach programs that have meant that we are really proud to be a diverse team, sort of leading diverse cultural, creative talent development in our sector. So really sort of proud of all of that. However, based in Swindon, we've always nested with other cultural organisations, which has been fine. Those relationships have been very positive. We were in with a dance studio for over 10 years. Most recently, we've been part of a theatre space for over 10 years. But the downside of that is we were never in a fit-for-purpose facility, and particularly given that we're a digital organisation, just really practical things like not having access to high-speed broadband, let alone accessibility issues and so forth, which were really limiting the experience for our participants and also our credibility as a social enterprise. In effect, we are... So sorry, everything was on silent, but my phone just went through to the computer, so I completely apologise. Basically, we had the challenge that we didn't have a fit-for-purpose facility. It was a barrier both to our sort of financial model as a social enterprise. We're a production company, as well as having inclusion and talent strands, which means our income strands also depended on having fit-for-purpose studios and everything that it would be linked around that. So our journey has actually began a long time ago. We went from being part of a local authority to lobbying successfully to be independent when we could see that financial cuts were really impacting people around the time of the financial crisis. So 2008, 2009, when I became director, I timed it really, really badly. And it really was handshake, well done, you've got the job. By the way, we're cutting your funding by 50%. It really was sort of quite a difficult time, which a lot of us will remember and a lot of us have navigated. But at that time, we realised that we needed to be really clear about having flexibility about where our funding came from to be sustainable going forward. And with the support of the local authority, we went independent as a not-for-profit CIC. And the reason I'm sharing this part of the story is that it becomes relevant for how we have achieved a part of Swindon's Towns funding bid, their successful bid. Partly it's because we were part of the local authority, which historically, which meant that we were known by officers, by council members, by the Local Economic Partnership, or LEP, as some of you may be familiar with. So that was an advantage that we had. And equally, as you can imagine, when you're part of a local authority, you're always moved around different departments all the time. They're always restructuring. So sometimes we were part of education, sometimes we were part of, town centre regeneration and so forth. It meant that our relationships and our colleagues' knowledge of us was quite broad, and that was a real strength when it came to us looking at our need to go forward and doing a formal options appraisal process, which Arts Council supported in 2016 to 17. And without giving away all our story at once, just to flag that that's how early on we were. Well, I was thinking about it probably 2 years before that, but in terms of getting to the point of an options appraisal, that was still some years away, some years ago.
Okay, cool. Thank you very much, Sheena. I think it's really useful to have a bit of background and context on that. And I think that question of who you need to be talking to and who the key contacts are, we can come back to in a minute. And also that point around kind of having a long lead in time in terms of what you want to do. Could you just take us through a bit of the spec in terms of what that Towns funding is going to? What will be the kind of end result of that investment?
Okay. Yeah, no, sure. So our proposition is part of a £25 million proposition that went from Swindon to central government, and I think we were awarded just shy of 20 million of that. So in other words, a number of proposals went forward from Swindon, and the government did pick and choose what they wanted to support in the end, which is again part of that process. But in terms of what we're going to be able to achieve, it is so exciting for us. As I say, we've nested with other people before. We've dealt with that in different ways by being very outward facing in terms of our delivery. So 60-70% of our delivery happened completely away from a building. But actually, we have, through our work with diverse communities, with young people, with local educational establishments in higher education, become very aware that people need a place to come to belong to. Just like where you are in Watershed today, when you turn up there, you need to feel welcomed, you need to feel you have a place, you need to feel like you see people who you relate to, who you can aspire to being. And I'm aged over 50, and I can tell you when I was first going into media organisations, I was not seeing that at all. So I do feel really passionately about the fact that we've delivered an ongoing inclusion programme and talent development programme, which means that when people will come to Create, they see people who are members of staff who look and feel like themselves, and they can aspire to be running Create in a few years' time. So what we're going to be doing is taking over one of the former Brunel Carriage Works units. So I don't know if people may know, but Swindon really expanded over 200 years ago as a town when it became the home of Brunel's works for the GWR Railway. We were literally halfway between London and Bristol, and they decided Swindon was going to be the place for those works. And I think there were over 20,000 people working there at any one time up till really quite recently. I think about 30 years ago they closed the works officially. So it was a huge employer for the town, and they've been very proactive in Swindon about reusing that incredible sort of historical site, and there is a formal heritage action zone, and so the carriage works units, which are massive, because they literally had to be big enough to do the final assembly of carriages. So you can imagine we're going to be moving from about 1,500 square feet, which was our previous premises, to about 7,000 square feet, which will include fit for purpose studio spaces, workshop spaces, screening and events areas, as well as office and edit spaces. And very excitingly for us, as Watershed has a fantastic cafe and networking space. And the bit of context of Swindon, we're actually a really successful and thriving town. We're always the butt of everyone's jokes because everyone says we're ordinary, and people come to do their, they come to pilot things in Swindon because apparently we're an average demographic. But that does mean, if overall is average, we have pockets of severe social deprivation, as well as, great success and affluence as well. And we made a real commitment to the town centre of Swindon to being part of the regeneration story. And that very much came out in our options appraisal process. It would have been cheaper and easier to be on an industrial estate on the edge of town. But we absolutely weren't going to look at that as a board, because it was about being accessible to participants, to communities, to people who didn't see themselves being part of the creative industries, and particularly part of the moving image and digital creative industries. It was really important that we made that commitment to the centre. And so we're absolutely delighted. They are digging right now, they are building right now in the carriage works, and we will be looking to do a partial occupation in the spring and start the specialist fit out from that point.
Cool. I mean, it sounds an amazing project, it really does. And you said about how long this is this has been in gestation for you as an organisation. I mean, at what point, given when Towns Fund kind of came onto the horizon, how far had this been pitched? Had this been pitched into the local authority at the time? How far along were you in this conversation in general around the kind of principles and the ambitions of it?
So we'd been in those conversations for a really long time. So people had been aware of the options appraisal process, and we'd actually had a false start probably about 2018, where we had a town centre partner, a former nightclub, really interested in us being there. We even had a successful Arts Council small capital bid, and you can imagine what it felt like when unfortunately the partner withdrew and I had to give back an Arts Council capital bid, which was really challenging at the time, but absolutely understand why that had to happen. But what good came out of that process was we had got to a point in our understanding of what we actually needed from a new venue. We were quite advanced in our planning, literally down to equipment lists, kit lists, initial architects, layouts, and so forth. So that when so those dialogues had included local authority, council members, officers, the local enterprise partnership, local growth hubs, all of those people who needed to understand what we did and why it mattered, but also we were articulating on behalf of the sector why culture was an important part of the narrative around town centre regeneration. And so if you think about sort of 2-3 years ago, sort of 2019, 2020, there was some really good evidence emerging, and Arts Council were part of that, sharing some good practice from around the country in terms of impact of culture on regeneration in certain localities. So it really meant, it has eased my conversations, because I was able to point to evidence, because of course you're really passionate about your organisation and you're passionate about the vision of what you want to achieve, and being able to point to other good practice, being able to point to wider economic impact, and there's a really a lot of concern in Swindon about skills, and we're below national average for educational attainment. So being able to talk about what you do in terms of local issues that matter, and we're very rooted in community issues. We work with diverse communities, that's fine. it's translating that into the impact of your work on jobs creation, on formal skills development, on that town centre story. Being able to speak that language, taking time to be familiar with the evidence, and being able to share, those reports with the relevant colleagues was really important. When the moment came for the Towns Fund, we were able to move very quickly and gather the info that was specific for that fund.
Fantastic. And in terms of where you were in making that case and having that information to hand, is that something that the council was able to help you with, or is it something you'd kind of sorted through the options appraisal and other work that you'd kind of prepped ahead of time?
I was really fortunate. I think it was a bit of both. In that, I think this is, I'm fortunate in that, in my experience, that people within local authorities have always been really honest with me. Sometimes for better, sometimes for worse. And I think we'd got to the point that they were really honest, saying, we can see that Carriage Works as a whole development is going to have a digital focus, and we can see the value of there being a cultural digital organisation at the heart of that. And the reason they were able to say that is because I'd been telling them for about 2 years that when you look at hubs around the country, they either have an HE hub or they have a cultural hub at the heart of successful clusters. And they had heard that and listened to that. So when it came to the point of getting that proposal in at short notice, it was lockdown. I think I literally had about a week or so of real work time to put that together. People want to help you. People don't, no one wants to set anyone up to fail. Everyone's too busy for that. People want to help you with intelligence to make your case as robustly as possible. So we knew the headlines from our development work, from our relationships before. If you're serious about making an offer for your locality, you will know what their growth plans are. You will know what their strategic priorities are. You need to think about how you tie into those and how you might articulate that. So when those opportunities come, hopefully you're in a strong position to make those final tweaks to the case for that particular fund. And that's what we were able to do with the Towns Fund, where suddenly they were talking about transport infrastructure, and to be honest, I'd never really thought about that before, but actually we knew we were near the train station, we knew there was the Bus Boulevard development planned for the area, so we were able to reference that. But again, an officer who was overseeing that process would have been happy to have given me that info if I hadn't known it. So people aren't there to trip you up, they want to see strong proposals go forward for their town, and that's what I would encourage people to build on. Think about what your town needs and wants more widely. What do the councillors want? What does your public research show you that they want? And then articulate that back to the funders.
Cool. Thanks, Shahina. I think it's really useful to talk through your experience of it, and I think we'll move to Chris, who can talk through kind of a range of other projects that you may have seen this kind of work happening on. But very quickly, I just wanted to ask you. You pointed out that the way that Create Studios has worked over time has meant that you have a familiarity with people across the local authority, different departments, but I wonder do you have any advice for people who might feel that they don't have such strong connections at the moment and on these kind of conversations, where to begin on building those relationships?
Sure. I think doing some good desk research, seeing who the key organisations are out there. So everyone will have a local enterprise partnership covering their region. Have a look at who's on that board. Is there anyone with special responsibility for cultural regeneration or any other heading that you think you might fit into, whether it's skills or education or so forth. So definitely do start with local enterprise partnerships, your actual local authority, perhaps become familiar with who's lead member for culture or something similar, again, where you can have a hook for a conversation there. And then also do, in terms of your own sector, people like Creative Industries Federation, I think they're now Creative they've merged, haven't they, with Creative England, but those bodies who are doing that sector watching as well, you know, seek some advice from them in terms of some strategic partners to have dialogue with. I think your local higher education partners are significant too. Swindon doesn't have a university, so that has implications in terms of, for us, not retaining 18 to 24-year-olds, and that's an agenda for us in terms of our economic development. People therefore are really excited when we talk about growing young people and retaining them, or graduates returning back to us. But if you are fortunate enough to have a university near you, talk to them, and it might not even be the most obvious department that is the one that is helpful to talk to. So obviously if you've got a media department or film department, of course I imagine you're already in relationship, but think perhaps a little bit wider as to who else might be helpful to talk to there. But there are all sorts of things like growth hubs and other bodies. People like Business West have been really helpful to us. They have a Swindon wing, but I know in Bristol, for example, they're linked to the Swindon team, but they are really good at knowing who's out there, what partners and what initiatives are coming forward. So people who might have a cultural partnership of business and culture in your area, get to know them, offer to be on their boards, take the time to give as well as to receive, because that is when people see integrity about who you are and what you do. And I have done my time on LEP boards, on cultural partnership development, not because I knew the Towns Fund was coming and it would benefit me, but because actually we knew that for Swindon and for our wider development and for our development as an organisation, a robust kind of infrastructure and people having good intelligence around the role of culture in regeneration was of benefit to everyone. And, obviously I'm delighted that we're some benefit coming back to Create from that time. But, those conversations are important in their own right.
Cool, thank you for that. That's helpful. I mean, I might throw it open to Chris now. I mean, we've had a conversation around what's happening in Create Studios. I mean, from your perspective in Arts Council, I know you must see a whole range of organisations working in the cultural sector engaging with these funds and demonstrating how they chime with political priorities in their area. In order to access and kind of leverage this funding. And I just thought I'd ask you to start by pointing out some of the things that any kind of cases that you think are particularly useful to learn from.
Yeah, happy to. I think the first thing I'd say is Shahina said it all. That's the how-to guide really of what you need to be doing from now in order to access certainly the next round of Levelling Up funds, which we don't know what they'll look like, but they're tens, hundreds of millions of pounds. They are capital, and you have to be ready for them, rather than wait for the guidance to come out and then realise that you need another 2 years to get ready for it. So I think, particularly with some of the things like we saw with Towns Fund, a lot of the cultural projects that we see in the Towns Fund, and across the north we have 44 of those 101 Towns Funds, and I think probably 38 of them are very heavily culturally focused, which is fantastic. But a lot of those projects are projects that we knew about. There were ones that were already in the pipeline. There were ones that were very much on the radar of the local authorities. They weren't new ideas because there hasn't been time with the way these funds were devolved to actually develop new ideas and kind of build new partnerships. You had to be sort of right place at the right time. So across those many examples of Towns Fund and also Levelling Up, some of the things that we're seeing are things like Oldham Coliseum and also Bolton with its theatre redevelopment, quite a lot of museums and quite a lot of town hall and community facilities. These are all culturally focused, but they're very much probably already local authority owned or local authority part owned, working with an anchor cultural institution or a national portfolio organisation. So those kind of relationships are already in existence. And I think that's the key thing to say. Is it's as Shahina mentioned, if you feel you're not plugged into your local authority, or you don't, or if you're in part of a mayor or combined authority but you don't know what's going on, now's the chance to sort of get plugged into that. Find out if you have a cultural compact or a cultural partnership and get yourself involved, because I guarantee that the way that Levelling Up is going and the agenda is moving much more closely to the sort of things cultural organisations have been doing and will continue to do. So that's a really important message, I think. So if you think about 3 things, think about productivity. What is your project or work doing that is adding to your local economy in terms of skills, jobs, that sort of thing. Think about people. How is your work impacting and benefiting on local people and making things more accessible to local people? Think about place in terms of what does this mean in terms of priority places for Arts Council or priority places for Levelling Up? And what are we doing that's adding to the place itself, whether it's about the town centre or the vibrancy or pride in place? And then think about preparation. What do we need to be doing now to be ready for these bids? So another quick example, I'll talk about what's called the UK Community Renewal Fund, which is the predecessor to Shared Prosperity Fund. This is the one that's revenue. So this is a people fund rather than a buildings fund. We've had very little to do with this. It was rolled out really rapidly. Local authorities and combined authorities kind of had to make quick funding applications. So again, they would look for the people that were already delivering on social outcomes, skills outcomes and jobs outcomes. So we've seen organisations such as Helix Arts in Newcastle, who are very much plugged into that world already, being able to go, yes, we're doing this work, we can deliver these jobs and skills outputs, they could be part of a bid. We were very pleased to see in Rotherham a sizable investment in they're preparing for a UK city of children and young people's culture. So they're looking very much for that focus of young people and skills. They've been working on this for several years. So when this bid came, they were in an excellent position with the local authority and cultural sector to actually make a really compelling case. And that will be the story. You need to be positioned and you need to be ready for these new rounds of bids when they come out. We don't know when they're going to come out. We don't know quite what the details will be, but we do know they're coming, and we do know, as I said, it's about what are you doing for jobs and prosperity, what are you doing for people, and what are you doing for that place. So make sure you're prepared. If you're doing capital work, I don't want to get into details of bids, but make sure that you are on the road to looking at your REBA development stages for your building. Make sure you're doing feasibility studies and options appraisals. I've just come out of about 5 or 6 weeks of assessing an Arts Council fund, which hopefully I'll get time to talk about later. And all of the work I've been doing is looking at the risk. What's the risk on our investment when it comes to a capital project? If we invest in this, if the government invests in this, if a minister stands up and says they're going to invest in this, what's the risk of it happening or not happening? How ready is it? Because, like it or not, there is a political dimension to Levelling Up funds. You need to be able to demonstrate that the product or the story or the work that you're going to create is something that a politician can stand up and go, look at this as a result of this investment, look at the benefit it's bringing to local people, look at how it's helping to deliver local agendas. So you need to think about that when you've got these projects. If it's a project that's a fantastic idea, but you're not going to be able to pull it off by the time of the application, then don't do it. Wait for another round or get that preparation done further down the line, because we need to see applications that are not risky and are not going to fall apart, and we have a good optimism that what you're saying you can do is going to be delivered.
Nice one. Thanks, Chris. Yeah, I mean, as you say, I think it's all about kind of making sure you're hitting all those beats, but also actually thinking about how you can leverage support on a kind of public affairs side of things, whether that be through conversation with MPs and representatives like that, or or engaging your board, right, as well, and like thinking about what they can do for you. We are we are pretty much, we've got 10 minutes to go, so I want to kind of turn to questions. Very quickly before we do so, Chris, do you want to just flag what you were talking about when you talked about kind of capital support through Arts Council? Could you just give us a couple of names and where people can go to find out more on those if they'd be interested in looking into it?
Yeah, absolutely. So, little bit cagey, we know that through Department of Digital Culture, Media and Sport, we will be able to deliver more rounds, we think, of our current cultural investment funds, which look at libraries, museums, and then place-based development. So this is not official, but we think it's coming down the line. And we think we'll be able to announce things when we've got more detail next year. So on the larger cultural development funds, we're looking at £2 to £5 billion of capital and revenue development to do place-based cultural development that is going to make a sort of step change to your locality. So there's no information or details yet. Look at the Arts Council website, look at the Cultural Development Fund's first round to get an idea of the sort of things that have been invested in. In February, we should be able to announce the next round. So have a look at those and see what sort of projects and stories and ideas are being invested in. And we hope we'll be able to do more rounds of that in future, but we don't have detail like a lot of these. And it will be very closely aligned to Levelling Up, but it's very, very centrally focused on culture and creativity and creative industries at its core.
Okay, nice one. Thank you very much for that. I think we'll turn to questions then, if that's all right, and I'll pass over to Sally on it.
Thanks. Just before we start, could I just ask the panellists and Jack just to speak a little bit slower so the captions can keep up?
Yeah, sorry about that.
Thank you. Jack, maybe one for you. As all the examples are from England, can you discuss how this works for the other nations around the UK, or does it not, or is it not relevant outside the English regions?
Yeah, absolutely. So so in terms of the funds that we're talking about here, so the Levelling Up Fund and the Shared Prosperity Fund when it comes online. They're open to applicants from across the UK. They're all kind of assessed by central UK government. So what government put in its in the prospectus for these funds was that they would kind of consult with devolved administrations in terms of what they invest in where appropriate. But the function is still held centrally. There is a kind of an allocation dedicated per nation in the same way that you kind of have Barnett formula money for each of these funds pertaining to each of the nations. There is a slightly different process on Northern Ireland, which I won't go into here for time, but come to me if you want to know anything on it. And then obviously, I mean, yeah, we've talked here on Arts Council England and what's going on with Cultural Development Fund, but obviously you know it would point you towards parallel organisations in the nations to see what they have going on, whether that be the Arts Council of Wales, whether it be Creative Scotland's Queen Scotland, Northern Ireland's Green Arts Council, Northern Ireland as well.
Super, thanks, Jack. A BFI one that's come through, so maybe for you again, Jack. Mm-hmm. What's the BFI's role in Levelling Up, and what would you say to the long-running cinemas that were rejected to the Cultural Recovery Fund as unviable by BFI, but they are in areas that need levelling up?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I guess we'll take the first part of the question first. I think so. We have I guess we have a slightly different function on Levelling Up to places like Arts Council, just by virtue of the fact that our investment is not capital funding in itself. But the role that we can play is firstly kind of helping make the case for the value of investment in the sector, both through kind of contact with combined authorities, etc., but also through the research that we produce on value around cultural value of investment, around the economic returns. Hopefully, we can kind of help in that sense. In terms of linking up projects that would like to explore funding, those organisations we were talking about that might not be so far down the road in terms of the conversations, I'd kind of encourage everybody to get in touch with their film hubs and the Film Audience Network, the film hubs in the first instance as a key local contact to help make those to help introduce you and make those discussions happen, and they hopefully should be able to signpost you in the right way or point you towards us, kind of in the central team as well to help you out. I think there's a question with the Levelling Up Fund going forward as well, how DCMS might engage ALBs on the question of assessment, but we shall see what comes of that with the white paper. And then in terms of the Cultural Recovery Fund, I know obviously levelling up and getting that kind of spread in terms of in terms of the places that we support through the fund, and that get that backing. That kind of UK-wide provision is one of the things that was a really key consideration. I mean, it was there among a number of other criteria as well that has to be taken into account when we're kind of handling government money. And I know that organisations would have been kind of assessed on a range of those factors. And I guess it's when you look at all of them together that those decisions were made. But I know that from the team at the BFI who's been working on it, who've been working on incredibly hard, making sure that goes out to as many people as we can, as we can get it to, has been front and centre of their work for the last year and more. That's what I'd say.
I'm going to promise that I didn't write this question, but what do you think we can expect to see in the new BFI strategy around geographical levelling up? Will the hubs continue? Will they get increased funding or autonomy in order to see further decentralisation?
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, in terms of the next National Lottery funding strategy, which is due to come online from April 2023, we're in the process of building it now, and I think so far we've very much been in kind of evidence gathering mode. So program design is something that has to happen in kind of collaboration with DCMS over the next year, with checkpoints in with the sector, kind of publishing where we think we're going with everything along the way and having those conversations. I think it's too early at the moment to come out and make any kind of commitments, not least because whatever we need to do needs kind of formal approval by DCMS. What I would say is that this as an agenda point is not going anywhere. It's something like both politically making sure that there is greater provision across the UK is front and centre of the agenda, but also it's something that the BFI is committed to as well, with the kind of the vision, the mission, the purpose that were announced recently. It's not like I think you can say pretty confidently that we were looking to do more than ever on that agenda and kind of working on a UK-wide basis. That's until we're a little further down the line. That's probably all we can say, really.
I'm going to take that as a yes. I'm only joking. We've got a couple more minutes, so I think we can fit a couple more questions and bring the panel in, if that's okay, Jack. Many of these projects are long-term, maybe 10 to 15 years to complete. Do the panel worry about how long-term government's commitment to levelling up will last?
All right. I mean, I might just leave it to Sheena and Chris. Is anybody that'd like to come in on that one? Go on then, Chris.
Yeah. I think life's too short to worry about things like that. Levelling up as a phrase might disappear, but I think I've been on lots of webinars and briefings where many wise, experienced ex-ministers are going, levelling up is nothing new. This has been around since the 30s, and I think the issues and the challenges and the needs will remain. And I suppose one of the interesting things about all these capital programs is that that capital development will be in train. It will happen. Some of them may not happen as designed, but they will all be there. And then we have an interesting challenge with those places and other funding organisations and private sector, and how those capital developments are then run and financed. And we want to do that because we don't want to see hundreds of new cultural capital developments, theatres, etc., that are suddenly have to close because there is no one there to run them. There are no audiences, and there's no way of actually making them happen. So I think these are long-term commitments. Whatever government we have and whatever particular political drives or phrases we have, getting these things happening and making a success of them is probably a responsibility of the whole sector, not just government.
Thanks.
I'm going to squeeze one really quick one in,
Yeah,
if
yeah.
you don't mind, because this would be really interesting to get your opinion. Any tips on cracking LEPs? Ours seem impenetrable and inaccessible.
Go. Yeah, I was going to say, go on, Shahina.
Yeah, well, I'm really sorry to hear that it's been so very difficult. My experience was the opposite, was that they felt quite aware that, well, their representation wasn't that diverse, so I guess I had an advantage in that sense. But they knew they didn't have all of the solutions for the benefits they wanted to see for their area, and were keen to have dialogue. I think if you're finding them impenetrable, I would start with the local authority, because there'll be someone within your local authority who's responsible to be like a link person with the LEP. You know, they'll be having to attend every board meeting and so forth. They'll know what funds and opportunities are upcoming. They may even be responsible for projects that have already been funded in their delivery within the local authority sort of area. So I'd say if the LEP is tricky to get into, start with the local authority, see who the LEP coordinator or officer is. They're usually 2 or 3 in my experience, who are regularly having to meet the LEP. And also there are people who regularly go to those meetings who are the chief executive of your local authority, and maybe the head of finance or a couple of the council members will be members of that board. So again, if you start with dialogues with them and talk to them about that you want to know what the LEP is up to, you want to know what their priorities are and how you could possibly meet those priorities, and just to get that dialogue going and to hopefully access that way.
Nice one, thanks for the tips. I think we'll leave it there, right? It's lunchtime. So, for lunch outside, I think there's screenings as well in cinema. It's screen 3, isn't it? Yeah, sure. So, thanks, everybody. Thanks to Shahina and Chris for joining us. And thank you, everybody in the room as well. See you for a sandwich, people that are here.
Thank you to everybody. Did pretty well, except there were a few mistakes that I made that I have just recently cleared up.